And the answer is very simply, as a Christian, I must ask Jesus what he would have done with the Crusades. I'm supposed to ask Jesus what he would have done with the Inquisition. And I know exactly what Jesus would have done. He would have condemned them. Because nowhere in the New Testament, nowhere in Scripture do I see at any place that we are permitted to use the sword for God's kingdom. That's pretty obvious, I think, from what we said tonight. Jesus was very clear that he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So if Jesus would have condemned the Crusades, then I have to condemn the Crusades. And I'm sure he would have condemned the Inquisition. Therefore, I have to condemn the Inquisition. Which makes it a lot more simple to me, because I love coming back to Jesus. I've asked for 25 years to show me anything about Jesus that's irrelevant. And you know, I can't find anybody that can find anything about Jesus that's irrelevant, including when it comes to peace and violence. Certainly, violence was used in the Old Testament. And there was a need for violence, but we must leave it in the Old Testament. So when you look and see what Moses was doing, when you look and see what Joshua was doing in Joshua chapter 6, verse 21, where he kills men, women, and children, and even donkeys, and all living things. That's a horrendous verse. That's a horrendous scenario. We must ask, what was God doing at that time in 1400 BC? Because nowhere else does he allow man to do that again. And it's because of these reference points, when I look back at the Old Testament, I realize we're not permitted to do that anymore today. We don't live by that paradigm. We don't, for God, and I thank God we don't, because if we did live by that paradigm, then I'd have to start circumcising, I'd have to start sacrificing. I've got 3 boys, and I'd have to execute all 3 of them because they're rebellious. Thank God I don't have to live by that paradigm. My sons, thank God too. But folks, we need to be very careful. Who is it we follow? Do we follow the Mosaic model? Do we follow the Old Testament model? Or do we follow the model of Jesus Christ? When you come back to Jesus Christ, there's really no other answer. When you come back to Jesus Christ, we're not permitted to use violence. Now, I'm going to ask some problematic questions to my friend, Dr. Huck here. One of the questions I'm going to ask him is to go to his scripture and try to exegete verses such as Surah 47:4, which says, slay the unbeliever wherever ye find them. I have a problem with that reference. In verse 6, it says, and those who participate in jihad, great is their reward on this day, for they shall be in paradise. There's a lot of other problematic verses I could go to. Surah 9:5 is probably the most obvious one, but I don't want to use that tonight because I don't think that's a good interpretation that people are using. But I want to go to Surah 9:29, because in Surah 9, verse 29, which is the last surah that was revealed to the prophet the year he died in 632, therefore it is the most important. When I say surah, by the way, I mean book. Let me just define terms. And ayah 29 means verse 29. Because there it says to make war on the Ahli Kitab, make war on the people of the book. Now that affects me personally, because I am Ahli Kitab. We are Ahli Kitab, the majority of us sitting in this room. How are those verses going to be exegeted if this is the divine edict, if this is the revelation that according to Muslims has always existed, and this is the authority for them today? How are they going to exegete Surah 9:29? Verses like Surah 8:39, which says to make war, to cut off the heads, and yes, to take them, yes, until they all follow Allah and do the salat, the prayers. That's problematic for me. And it's these verses that we need to start exegeting, because I don't find verses like this in the New Testament. And if it is these verses that are all found in the Medinan surahs, which come later, therefore the more authoritative part of the surahs, of the Quran, and when I compare them to what I see in the New Testament, which is the most authoritative part for us, when I do compare the two, one with the other, the scripture that is of peace is not the Quran. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. I give you Jesus, and I give you his word. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Haq.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, thank you very much for Professor Smith. And I would also like to extend my appreciation and thanks to the organizers of this event. It gave me opportunity to see this wonderful town and this beautiful campus. And I appreciate your generosity to ask a Muslim and allow him to speak on his own behalf and from his own tradition. I'm not a scholar of Christianity, as Professor Smith is scholar of both Islam as well as Christianity. But I'm certainly blessed to have many good Christian friends who always help me to understand some issues. And I think that a respectful dialogue and conversation is an important way to understand each other's perspective. As Professor Smith mentioned, that if in fact we simply focus the words of violence which exist in Quran and in Bible, and we Google them, we may very well end up with same amount of verses and same amounts of words where killing and violence is referred. If we look into Quran, there are verses which he referred, and of course if you put all these verses at one place, they will be hardly more than 4 or 5 pages of the Quran. The rest of the Quran talks about theology, spirituality, morals, ethics, stories of prophets, and diversified themes which belong to the Quran. Here I would like to make few points, and I hope that you will give me a listening ear, that when we compare two situations, one of the important thing is that we have to keep in mind that what is the paradigm of thought which is being applied, and maybe the issue is discussed and present in another tradition in somewhat different ways. For example, if I ask a Christian friend of mine that do you pray 5 times a day, then of course he will say that no, I don't, and I may feel very good that I am a great Muslim who prays 5 times a day. But if I structure this question that what is the idea of prayer in your religious tradition, then I may realize that he is praying a lot more than I am praying. So similarly, if we ask issue that under what conditions Muslims go to war, and under what conditions Christians or any other community goes to war, then the answer may be more comparable, and we may better understand that what are the conditions in which societies and communities go to war, and what are the rules and what are the laws which govern when they use violence. In this sense, one aspect which in fact Professor Smith referred, and I would elaborate it a little bit more, is the nature of Quranic revelation. That Quran is not a text which is written at a certain time in history. As we all know, and those of us who have even basic knowledge of Islam will know, that Quran is a text which Prophet Muhammad produced in 23 years of his prophetic life. So it came in very small segments in the context in which Prophet Muhammad was at that time. Then these passages were very loosely put together in different chapters of the Quran. And that makes Quran a kind of complex document and a kind of mysterious document, and in order to understand and interpret a certain text, it's in fact very important to go into the socio-political context in which that verse was revealed. And these verses cannot be randomly applied or randomly interpreted. Of course, Quran has many other verses. There is a verse in the Quran, and it is in fact Medinan verse, the later chapters of Quran, where Quran says that Christians are Muslims' best friends. وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى, chapter 5, verse 82. There are verses in the Quran which talk that all those who believe in Islam and all those who believe in Christianity and all those who believe in Judaism, they are saved by God. They should not worry as long as they have faith in God and in the hereafter. Now these verses are also present in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 62, chapter 5, verse 69. Other verses which talk about that all humans are brethren, they are all created by God, and they are here to interact with each other and love and respect each other. So we have a variety of differences in the Quran which have certain social context, and there is a complex way through which these verses are understood and interpreted. Another aspect I would like to draw your attention to, that Prophet Muhammad was not born in the background or in the context of a great civilization, as Jesus was. That there was a Roman civilization with its armies, with its laws, with its bureaucracies. So a certain political structure was present in the context in which Jesus started his mission and his ministry. But Prophet Muhammad came to a desert where there are only tribes, where there is no idea of law. They have never seen a governance. They don't know what civilization is. There is no written tradition. There is no academic tradition. Their religion is pagan religion, idol worshipping. And here in this context, Prophet Muhammad starts his mission. So Prophet Muhammad replaces these idols with the idea of one God. They believe that earthly life is the only reality. And Prophet Muhammad teaches them that man is morally responsible and accountable before God for what she is doing. And he replaces their tribal customs with a divine law, and this law becomes the governing and organizing principle of that new community. And he changes their tribal loyalty to this newly formed ummah, this community of believers which have come together on the principle of this new revelation which Prophet Muhammad has brought to his people. So Prophet Muhammad is in fact the first person who gives Arabs a civilization. And Arabs are exposed to civilization very first time in their history through the teachings and through the message of Prophet Muhammad, who for us is the last prophet in the long tradition of prophets, in which we obviously believe in Prophet Jesus, Moses, Abraham, and all others. And here, if you look from this point of view, that in 23 years of Prophet's life, he brings this enormous transformation in Meccan society, in Arabian society. And if you look at how many wars were really committed and how much conflict was there, you will be surprised that in fact there are less than 1,700 people who died in all these wars, and roughly divided same between Muslims and non-Muslims, as Muslim tradition narrates in detail the events and who lost his life where. So here we have in Islam an origin of a religion, but also an origin of a civilization. So there is a state, there is a society, and then there is a personal faith. And all these things are together. And when you have these things together, then obviously every aspect of human society and everything which happens in a human community, it comes under the framework of what we will call Sharia or Islamic law. And Sharia and Islamic law is not something very rigid and fixed. Sometimes mistakenly it is translated in English as God's law. It's really not God's law. It's essentially a human law, but when that law is designed and it is developed, it goes in order of looking into Quran, looking into the tradition of Prophet, into the tradition of his companions, early scholarly work, and it is a complex mechanism under that this law develops. So therefore, when we look at these verses, or the idea of violence in the scripture and in the Quran, we have to understand that here what we are dealing with is the realm of Sharia or Islamic law, that how it handles the issues of war and peace. Now, without going into this another dimension that many Muslims will say that jihad means inner purification and moral struggle, which is certainly one meaning of the word, and the word jihad is used in that sense also. But in Islamic law, jihad is also used as a law of war. And it is in this sense that we are discussing this issue of war and peace. So therefore, I am focused on this aspect of the law of jihad. Jihad is not a holy war. Okay? In fact, there is no idea of holy war in Islam. The holy war in Arabic is al-harb al-muqaddas, and that term does not exist in Quran, in tradition of Prophet, and in Islamic law. It was a medieval concept. Because in Islam, war essentially remains an evil and wrong, something which is not desired. But it is accepted as a reality in collective life, and as such it is addressed that how this war should be fought. Also, I would like to remind you that jihad is not the opposite of pacifism either. Okay? So you should not compare pacifism with jihad. Okay? Jihad is not the opposite of pacifism. Jihad is in fact the law of war, which tells us that what are the rules, what are the norms, what are the standards which must be applied and maintained if a society goes to war. And that is what the law of jihad really is. And if you look at the law of this war, the law deals essentially with moral and ethical restraints if violence is ever used. And if you will study the law of war in Islamic tradition, you will find that this is in fact the dominant theme of jihad in Islam. There is always focus on defense, always discouraging to initiate violence, extremely discouragement that violence should never be started. You should not be the one to initiate it. The law that any peace treaty which you sign must be respected, and under no circumstances a peace treaty should be violated. The law that you should not attack a community without a prior notice, knowing that why a war is about to start. If that war is conducted, the classical Islamic law will never allow that a non-combatant, a woman, a child, an older person should ever be killed or attacked. The law specifically prohibits that the worship place of any community, and Quran specifically mentions churches and synagogues, that they cannot be destroyed and they cannot be demolished. Nature cannot be destroyed because nature is the sign of God. So you cannot flood a society, a community, a city. You cannot torture. You cannot mutilate. And Muslims have been historically continuously engaged with this law as the new developments have taken place. In 18th century, a technique of hurling machines came, that where a rock is thrown through these machines on a city from outside the city wall. We are talking here pre-modern times. And Muslims discuss that is it permissible to use a hurling machine? And majority of ulama, the scholars of religion, they said that no, we cannot use it, because if you are throwing a rock from outside the city wall, we really do not know where does this rock fall. It may fall on a child, on a woman, on a church or worship place, so it is not acceptable. And in fact, one of the major jurists of that time, whose name was Shaybani, he complained that if Muslims interpret law in such a rigid and restrictive manner, that Muslims will not be able to fight any war at all. Islamic law prohibited the use of fire because the idea was that only God can use fire. Humans should never use fire. So burning a tree or an orchard or burning an enemy, putting his house on fire, was prohibited in Islamic law. And in fact, when modern weaponry came, that was one of the issues which was debated, that what should we do? Because all these colonial powers which were coming to Muslim lands, they were coming with this modern weaponry. But unfortunately, one of the tragedy of our time is that this classical law of jihad is collapsing in contemporary Islam. And there are many people who are not willing to adhere to any law at all. Not to Islamic law, not to Western law, not to international law. And you can see that there is obsession in the world by many nations, including many Muslim nations, that who really want to have nuclear weapons. How they can argue for nuclear weapon in the light of classical Sharia and Islamic law is in fact unthinkable. There is no possibility for that. But then they will go that what should we do? There is necessity. Our enemy has it. Okay? And that is the logic which is used to dismantle the restrictions which Islamic law applied on violent behavior of individuals and society. One more point which I would like to say about jihad is that it is also one of the common misperceptions that Muslims use jihad or violence to propagate their religion. Jihad is never used, and it is specifically prohibited to use violence for converting a person to religion. Islamic law, Quran is absolutely clear on this issue. Therefore, war can never be used. You can never say you will attack a community because it is a non-Muslim community and then you will go and convert them to Islam. That is not permissible under Islamic law. Quran is an absolute, very, very absolutely clear on that. In fact, one of the great scholars of Judaism, Maimonides, and I'm sure most of you know, was a great scholar of Judaism. He in fact was converted to Islam as a young person, and later on he reverted back to Judaism. And this story is narrated in Bernard Lewis, who is a Jewish scholar of Islam, his book, The Jews of Islam. And later on, he became a close physician and associate of Muslim Caliph in Cairo. And one of his enemies went and filed a case against him that he is an apostate and he has reversed his religion, so under Islamic law he should be executed. And he has no right to hold that power. And in fact, he successfully defended himself in the Muslim court that his first conversion to Islam was under duress, and he was not truly free in those mental circumstances in which he accepted, and therefore, according to Quran, that acceptance to Islam will not be valid. And he, in fact, very successfully defended himself. Many regions of the Muslim world, for example, one of the largest region of the Muslim world, Indonesia, largest Muslim country with 170 million population, Malaysia, all these regions, a Muslim soldier never put a foot there. There was no